Today we're back at the budget end with a mechanical keyboard from First Player, and this is the Firerose MK3. This is quite a nice box for a budget mechanical keyboard, just nice, simple, clean and elegant, and on the back we actually get a demo of the CIY feature that we'll check out later. Inside we have some paperwork, a little bag with a plastic ring keycap puller, a key switch puller that we'll use later, and 4 Ultimate Blue key switches. And finally the keyboard itself. And first impressions is that it has some pretty good heft to it, and there's also no flex to it. It's a very simplistic rectangular design that I like. There is no top shell, so it has a floating key design, so we can see the key switches are partly exposed on the sides, which you may or may not like. The top is made from steel, which is a nice feature. Usually keyboards that have no external top shell will have an aluminium plate, making them a bit lighter than other keyboards. So that's why this is still quite weighty. And we can tell this because it's magnetic and is a ferrous metal, where aluminium on the other hand is non-magnetic. The typeface or font on the keycaps has that gamery look. It is a gaming keyboard, so it fits the theme, but I personally prefer a cleaner and more simple design. The keyboard has a quite slim build. There's a touch of natural elevation for more comfortable typing, but overall it's a pretty flat profile. The plastic and steel have a very similar textured black finish that makes it difficult to distinguish between the both, but I like this sort of finish because it doesn't show fingerprints and stuff. On the rear is the non-detachable USB cable, which is unfortunate, but should help with that water resistance. On the bottom we have the plastic shell with some rubber feet for non-slip, and there's also 2 flip-up feet which are also nicely rubber tipped. Plugging the keyboard in, we're met with some colourful lights. While it may look like an RGB keyboard from pictures, unfortunately this has a fixed color array, so the LEDs themselves cannot change color, so we kinda have this tacky looking pattern. As always, if it's not true RGB, then it should just be a singular color in my opinion, and preferably white for that neutrality. There are some lighting effects though. There's also some lighting profiles from 1 to 8. There's 2 customizable lighting profiles on 9 and 0. We can customize these by pressing FN and home, and we can press the keys to our liking. Then press function and end to save it. The lighting is quite vibrant and bright though, and the somewhat thick lettering allows for more light to pass through it. Taking off the keycaps, and we have thin 1mm double shot ABS keycaps. They are thin, but that's what we expect on the budget end. However, these are double shot, which is nice, meaning that the legend is a different piece of plastic to the rest of the keycap, so it will never fade away. The switches used are Ultimate Blue switches. These are just Chinese clones of the German-made Cherry MX key switches, so we have a click and a tactile bump halfway, making for a nice and loud clicky experience. However, these are slightly more clickier and louder than the Cherry MX Blues, which I actually do like. And I would go as far to say that I actually prefer typing on Ultimate Blues compared to Cherry MX Blues, but that's just me. These Ultimate Blue switches are the newer ones though, which have these different looking stems on them. They still have the standard cross stem, but there's also these other protrusions that are supposed to prevent dust and other contaminants from entering the key switch. And here's a quick sound test. Now to the CIY feature. This stands for Change It Yourself and basically allows us to switch out key switches without the need of soldering work, so like hot swapping. To take out the switches, we use the silver puller from earlier and simply clamp and pull. And here we can see those holes that the pins go into. These are soldered into the PCB itself, and then they make contact with the pins when inserted. So here I have some SIP sockets for LEDs which work the same way. The SIP socket would be soldered to the PCB, and the pins of the LEDs snugly go into those sockets. However, there is an issue. I tried a variety of key switches from Cherry MX, Kale and Gatoron, including the Razer and Zelio variants, and they just don't fit. No matter how many times I tried and making sure the pins were straight and all that. I did however get a Zelio to work, but the pin was completely bent, so it wasn't actually inserted, but it was still making adequate contact. But these Outermove blue switches just seem to slide right in. And then I tried the older Outermove blue switches, and with force they do fit and they did work, but it was quite hard to get them to fit. So that's quite unfortunate, and I wouldn't say it makes it pointless since it still allows you to easily replace a key switch without desoldering, but it does take a lot away from the feature. If anyone has differing experience, just let me know. Taking the keyboard apart is pretty simple after taking a bunch of Phillips head screws out. The bottom shell is nothing special, there's no ribbing on the bottom surface for reinforcement, and it is quite thin so it has a lot of flex to it. But that doesn't really matter too much with a strong 1.5mm steel plate which is folded at the back and front, making it really sturdy. Looking at the PCB, and it's busier than usual, we can see that the sockets for the switches are soldered in, so I guess these can be desoldered and perhaps put into another keyboard. There's no sockets for the LEDs since they are SMD LEDs, and we also have diodes for each key switch. Now to the dustproof and waterproof claims. The device claims to have an IPX7 rating, which is a very common water rating for mobile devices, but you'd mostly hear something like IP67 or IP68, where the 6 would be for the dust rating and 7 is the water, but they don't give a dust rating interestingly. A 7 rating means that we can submerge the keyboard up to 1 meter deep for up to 30 minutes. But this thing isn't water sealed or anything, rather it's using a drainage system to allow spills and liquids to drain out, meaning that it's very open, but let's just get to testing. First let's do a simple spill test with some water. When spills happen, it's usually when the keyboard is in use, so I'll leave it plugged in. And the water just seems to seep through the keyboard with the keyboard still working fine, and that was about 250ml of tap water. So taking the keyboard apart, and it looks like the water just went through the board, but the bottom side of the PCB wasn't affected, which makes sense since the water just went downwards. So now let's just submerge it, and I did dry it well before doing this. According to its IPX7 rating, it should work, and well, the LEDs did stay on and it was actually working for a bit, but after a minute or so it started going haywire with random actuations, and finally it just stopped working. So I unplugged it to take it out of the water, and I plugged it back in and it was lighting up, but it was flashing all over the place and was registering random inputs. And this thing was absolutely drenched with all the insides and the underside of the PCB completely wet, and the keyboard was still going crazy. After about 5 minutes though, it stopped and was surprisingly working fine. In fact, it was still functioning while I was pouring water directly onto the PCB itself. About 12 hours later, the device wasn't being recognized, so it wasn't working at all. But after 24 hours it was working for the most part, but there was still some random actuations, and then after 48 hours it was working perfectly. However, this is only water. The real problem occurs with stickier liquids like Coke or coffee. Of course I don't recommend doing any of this, but this was a pleasant surprise, but how it will hold up over time is a different story. So note to the IPX7 waterproof rating, it did stop functioning and this was only for a few minutes underwater. There were periods where the keyboard did not work and didn't power at all, which makes sense since the tap water would definitely create shorts, but after drying it actually just pulled through. I'll also link a proper spill guide in the description below. At the end of the day, this is a budget mechanical keyboard, so we have the budget Ultimate Blue key switches, which I actually like anyway. We also have a somewhat cheapy aesthetic with the fixed rainbow lighting, but that's subjective from person to person. So it doesn't really look the part, but it has so many other features that gives the keyboard a lot of value at the budget price. The steel plate rather than the usual aluminium plate gives the keyboard good rigidity and that classic mechanical keyboard heft at over a kilo. We also have the CIY feature with the hot swappable key switches. Unfortunately, I couldn't get other key switches to fit in, which really does degrade the feature, but it's still there for the Ultimate switches, so it's better than nothing since you could desolder the sockets anyway. And lastly, the waterproof tag is misleading. It's more water resistant, but it still has drain holes for spills, so it's better than nothing, and it's actually still working, so not bad at all. Overall, for a full-size budget mechanical keyboard, it's packing a lot of features for a low price, with my main negative being the aesthetic design of the keyboard.